Good morning, and thank you everyone for attending. We have a big group this morning, so I'm going to give a few more seconds before we begin.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and I hope everyone is staying safe and is in good health. My name is Barbara Keating. I'm the CEO and president and founder of Computer Frontiers, Inc. I'm a board member of the Corporate Council on Africa, and I have been a member of Corporate Council on Africa for over 16 years. So I will be moderating the panel today of our very distinguished speakers. I would like to thank the CCA staff for their excellent work in putting this program together. So thank you so much. Florie Lizaire, the CEO and president of Corporate Council on Africa, unfortunately had a scheduling conflict this morning, and she won't be here at the opening of the webinar, but she will be here to give closing remarks. So she sends her greetings, and she kindly asked me to kick off with a few remarks from her desk, and so I'll do that now. First, thank you all for joining us today, and thanks for the ongoing support and engagement of CCA members and partners. You are helping CCA do what we've done for over 27 years, provide insight and connections to advance US-Africa trade and investment and help you do business on the continent. COVID-19 has changed the way many of us do business and underscores as never before the importance of ICT as a driver of economies worldwide. Imagine how much worse we would be during this pandemic without access to the internet and ICT innovations. Africa has made great strides in bridging the digital divide over the last few years and leapfrogging technologies in many areas. Pre-COVID, Africa already had over 50% of the global active mobile money accounts. And by 2022, broadband is expected to increase 7-fold. If anything, COVID-19 has accelerated these trends. We have brought together an excellent panel to explore how this is playing out across the continent from government and private sector perspectives. To set the scene, we are honored today to welcome the director of USTDA, Tom Hardy. CCA is a proud partner in an exciting USTDA initiative called Access Africa, which was launched just over a year ago at CCA's US-Africa Business Summit in Mozambique. The initiative was launched to support the digital economy in Africa. Director Hardy has led USTDA since 2017, prior to which he was USTDA's chief of staff, and farther back a country manager in East Asia and Sub-Saharan African regions. Before joining USTDA, Tom served as an advisor to the commissioner of the US International Trade Commission and as a staff member of the Committee on Ways and Means Commission in the US House of Representatives. And I should also mention that my company worked with Tom and USTDA for 12 years identifying viable projects and hosting trade conferences for the agency. So we're all good friends here, and we hope to further advance the partnership between American and African private and public sector. So with that, Tom, thanks for joining us today, and over to you.
Thank you, Barbara. It's great to be here, and I want to thank CCA, the team, Florie and her whole team, that have been able to organize this important ICT webinar. As everyone knows all too well these days, it's so important to find ways to stay connected. I think that in this COVID world, if we're not able to be together like we're so used to, we need to seize every opportunity to work together. And this ICT webinar is an important step. As we work in the era of COVID-19, is ICT that's bringing us and keeping us together. But I think, and I hope that this panel gets into this question, it's also shown the divide, the digital divide that has long been talked about but it's the educational divide, it's the economic divide. There's such a bright spotlight on economies that are doing well or are moving forward, and those that are struggling. And so much of that is dependent upon ICT infrastructure. And I think this is an area that it has touched every corner of the world, from the United States to Africa to Asia. Everyone is learning and trying to work differently and trying to find new ways. And so much of that new way is using ICT as that backbone that is keeping us connected. And that's why I'm so honored, as Barbara said, to be speaking to you today, a little about USTDA, but also about Access Africa and our initiative to drive investment into the digital economy in all corners of the continent. I'll only take a few minutes to talk about USTDA and what sets USTDA apart. First, we have a very specific mission, is to connect American private sector ingenuity, innovation, with overseas opportunities that advance infrastructure projects all over the world. We achieve this mission through investment, early stage project preparation work, whether it be feasibility studies, technical assistance, pilot projects. It's designed to provide an opportunity to understand American innovation, American technology, and how it can make a dramatic impact in countries, both the public sector and private sector, achieving their development goals. And we place particular emphasis on sectors where we know it has a tremendous opportunity to transform an economy, whether it be transportation, energy, and obviously ICT infrastructure. And while we're all, of course, view our priorities equally, Africa has and is important for me. For the last 2 decades, I've dedicated my career to supporting and working across Africa and have helped advance quality of life projects throughout the continent, developed deep friendships that will truly last a lifetime. And some of those earliest successes of the U.S. Trade and Development Agency from when we were established in 1992 took place in Africa, in the ICT sector. In 1994, in fact, we worked with the African Development Bank in what it seems like a bygone era of voice and data communication, helping them stand up their voice and data communication. That same year, we were working with South Africa, bringing a delegation led by the Minister of Telecommunications to the United States to introduce them to satellite communication technologies. As they say, that was the beginning of a beautiful relationship. And in the more than 20 years since then, USTDA has worked in every corner of the continent, driving ICT growth, driving investment into ICT. And I think we have created a legacy of success in markets across the continent. And that's why Access Africa and our partners with CCA is so critically important to our investment. Last year at CCA's conference in Mozambique, we set out to bring together US industry under an umbrella with our partners in Africa to identify those infrastructure opportunities that would have transformational changes. Little did we know then how important that investment was going to be as we live through the global health pandemic we're living in right now. But to us, the Access Africa initiative is a collaborative model and one of a kind. This region of the world represents a truly unique opportunity. So we have responded with a unique model where we've brought together US industry. Right now, we have 14 US industry members that represent all facets of ICT development. And we're fortunate that CCA is a key member of that partnership. And it's helped given us ideas on how we can be investing as an agency to be supporting ICT. Already, since the launch of that initiative, we're supporting TV white space development in South Africa, a Bonny Island cable project in extension project in Nigeria, and building on the investment and success we've had with CCOM to look at last mile fiber telecommunication access in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and Rwanda. This is what Access Africa is, and it's really where USTDA thrives, which is having strong US private sector partners looking and seeing opportunity, but being greeted by willing and able partners in Africa to drive economic growth, economic projects that really have the chance for transformational change. And USTDA, we intend to use the full breadth of our program, the project preparation work, the pilot projects, the bringing people to people together, whether through workshops, conferences, reverse trade missions, to help help you meet your infrastructure goals. These are the projects that will help our partners design, finance, and implement projects that will promote inclusive, secure, and sustainable connectivity. It is especially important in these difficult times that we are able to work together to strengthen our ICT infrastructure. So as we continue to deal with both the impacts of COVID today, but I think the impacts of COVID today are going to last for many, many years. As I said at the beginning, the economic impacts it is going to have, the educational impacts it's going to have are going to really extend far beyond when a vaccine's developed. And I think that what we do today is going to be transformational to the success of ensuring greater connectivity, that all of us, not just those on the phone, but those that want to be on the phone today and aren't able to be, are able to do so in the future. And I really appreciate the opportunity to start at the top of this conversation, but more importantly, listen to this panel. I think you've got a fantastic panel of the cabinet secretary, private sector developers, Google on the ground that are making transformational changes in Africa, and really appreciate the opportunity to kick this off today. I want to thank again CCA and Flory for her leadership in putting this together and making sure that even when we can't be together, we remain connected through this digital space. So with that, Barbara, I'll turn it back to you and thank you again and look forward to the conversation this morning.
Okay, thank you, Tom. That was very insightful, and some of the takeaways for me was that the digital divide does continue, and it even continues for us in the United States, and so nobody is really immune to it. And how do we cover those holes that we all have in our networks? And the other idea here is really we're trying to join together in the long friendships that we do have from the US government side, the US private sector with Africa, to build and to create lasting friendships and infrastructure and bringing us closer together. So with that, I would like to, if Tom, if you don't mind, if you could turn off your screen at this point. I'd like to invite our distinguished panel, and we will start with Cabinet Secretary Muchero from Kenya. But before we get started, I would like to, a couple of notes of housekeeping that we have, which is, this is more of a guided discussion, and really all protocols are acknowledged. We don't want to offend anyone, and please forgive us if you have been, but we are really trying to have a frank and open conversation today. I will be asking the panelists up to 3 questions, and depending on time, because we will leave time for the audience to also ask questions of the panelists directly. So if you are going to ask a question, please use your chat function in the Zoom or Twitter to send us your questions, but we'll only take questions from those who provide their name and affiliation. Okay, so with that, let's get started. So if the panelists would please turn on their screens and mics.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Happy to be here. Joe Muchero.
Thanks, Joe. And you and I have known each other for a long time, so it's hard for me to, so you can call me whatever you want to call me. But anyway, so that being said, I want to give you the floor first. And so I had mentioned to you that that you have experience from bringing a company and being an entrepreneur in the private sector in Wenatchee and carrying forward and working for Google, a big American company, And so you have this vast experience and then have now taken that into the government side of the ledger. So now what is happening with COVID, there is, as they say, crisis is opportunity, or something of that sort, which is in this time, there's also an opportunity to look at and evaluate how, where are we with our systems and the gaps in infrastructure, health and education, and to evaluate how ICT might better support the citizens of Kenya and Africa. So how has the pandemic shifted your priorities for advancing ICT usage in Kenya?
Thank you very much. Let me say that, one of the key objectives we've had, from our president and even, as a continent, is to see how can we create, for instance, a single digital market. But to be able to even stitch all these things together, you must start with the individuals, getting the individuals to start using technology so that you can be able to move forward. So I would say the silver lining with this pandemic is that it has forced almost everybody that I know to have to start using technology, to have to start behaving the way we used to behave when we were at Google. Government has challenges of, it takes maybe sometimes an hour to start some meetings and another hour to stop the meeting, in terms of just length of time. So by getting into, use of technology, it's been very good that we've even had very efficient meetings, not travel to other countries. I've seen our heads of state have also been meeting using technology. So first for me, the good thing is that everybody is now being forced to accelerate and use technology, which before they have not been using. That has meant that we've tested a lot of our infrastructure to make sure that it works, to make sure that everybody is also able to technically use this infrastructure. I'll confess that some of my cabinet colleagues had refused to even get onto social media. They felt that that would be risky enough from a technology point of view. But now they're some of the best users of technology, digital signatures. So we're really seeing great use. We've obviously, as a government, have to look at the whole country and how we provide services. And really, the COVID pandemic, the main challenge is health first. And this is across the whole country. So it's making sure that all hospitals, all health facilities have access to technology, and they can be able to send and receive information. And really, at the beginning, around March, we even now had video conferences with places like Wuhan, the different hospitals in the US, hospitals in Australia, just bringing our doctors together so that they can really understand how do they manage this pandemic. That in itself, stretched the use of our systems significantly. But what is good is that, we were able to, for the first time, be able to demonstrate to the country why it was important to invest in a national fiber optic cable, why it was important to ensure that everybody has this connectivity. In the past, we would have conversations with governors, telling them, look, we want to pass the fiber cable through your county. And they say, we must pay this, we must pay that. We had arguments with them. But today, we know that all of them, they want us to ensure that they have all this infrastructure in place. The mobile operators and other internet service providers, have the necessary capacity. So I would say as a country, we've been able to show the resilience of the networks and the ability for the networks to hold. We've had many schools go online. Not all the schools, many of the government schools don't have all the infrastructure. We've closed the actual schools. So people are going to school from their homes using the technology. So those that already had machines, had connectivity at home, were able to then continue learning. We have challenges with I would say many of the government schools where we don't have a lot of connectivity in people's homes. And so we have to find strategies of how we'll get, at least on the education sector, people connected. So these challenges, came in, but we've been able to see how technology can work. Obviously, every country has been working on contact tracing. Once someone is identified, how do we trace them? We've been using the technologies, mobile technologies, to be able to contact and trace people. The president has a very ambitious program where he's hiring, now it's almost 500,000 youth that are cleaning and fumigating the whole country and ensuring it's working, really creating an economic opportunity for them during these tough times when many jobs have been closed. We pay them using mobile money. That's how they receive their money. That's how we're able to audit to ensure that the money is going to the right places. We also have safety net for those who are old, over 70-year-old, the poor, the vulnerable, those with disabilities. They also receive some cash transfers from the government that again they receive using mobile money. So there are many of these technologies that we've actually harnessed that many people today acknowledge they can use. We now have the judicial services being provided online. You can see court cases being processed online. We're looking at how to ensure we're digitizing the court process, but COVID has made it a lot faster. Now we can also record and transcribe many of the court processes. So it has been very useful in terms of pushing the digital agenda, in terms of all our heads of state, because they are all connecting using the same technology, all of them accepting the value and the ability to be able to move quickly, fast, and efficiently without a lot of cost. And then there's many of the innovations that are happening, and we are leveraging and using those, whether it is for e-commerce, whether it is for job creation. So I can talk a lot about many of the things, I think, other than the really sad thing of the disease, losing lives. I think for technology, it's actually been able to move us very well. And of course, the many partnerships we've had with private sector, with other governments. We've worked very closely with the American government on many projects. Google, for instance, we've recently launched the Google Loan services. So now we have, actually this is the phone I was using with the president to be able to demonstrate that you can go to a rural part in Kenya and be able to communicate, even from State House with the president, with the rural community, using balloons, many kilometers up in the sky. So these are things I don't think would have been accelerated or allowed by our security forces. But because of the needs that are there, we've seen that they've been very cooperative and have allowed us to accelerate the process. So I know I'm sounding like COVID has been a good thing for technology. In one way it has been, but obviously it is a health crisis, an economic crisis, and we're grappling with all those. Thank you very much.
Thank you, CS. That was excellent. And as you know, I think historically, when we started, working with the internet long ago, some 30 years ago, we were always talking then even about virtual offices, and that all this, the airlines would even maybe disappear. Well, of course that wasn't true, but it is now. It is amazing to see that it has in that way pushed forward these agendas that have a lot of excellent impacts for us globally in terms of education, health, and finance. So I think you agree with me, would have those crazy talks of the collapse of distance long ago. And so now here we are 30 years later, but now we're into new levels of innovation on the platforms of the internet that were once built. So it's been a pleasure knowing you all these years and to see your great strides, coming from our sector into government. So we're much appreciative, and we enjoy following your career. So thank you so much. So please stay on. I'm going to introduce the other panelists, and I'll start with Chris Legrand. He's the CEO of Broad Reach Group. If you would just raise your hand so that people know. Bodhi Abifarin, the Chief Operating Officer for Flutterwave, and Charles Marito, the Director for Sub-Saharan Africa, Government Affairs and Public Policy for Google. Give me a wave there. There we go. Thank you very much. So I just wanted to have everyone introduce themselves briefly, and then I am going to start now with the next set of questions. So I'm going to start with you, Chris. The same question that I've often heard from other CEOs express, that if they could just stop the world, what they might do differently. However, in your case, not to see it as opportunity in crisis, but that you have been involved throughout your decade-long career in developing health systems for developing countries. And currently, Broadreach, your company's platform, is now in a key position to provide greater support. If you could speak on this briefly and to the opportunities you see in general in the area of health in ICT to support African countries recovering from the pandemic. I'd also like to mention that Chris has written a book, The Complete Business Leader, a framework for impact in work and life, and which is a practical primer of 7 steps to implement good leadership. And I think he demonstrates that. So I turn it over to you, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks, Barb, and appreciate it. And appreciate the words from the minister. I can see the connections between the private sector and the government sector really well in what you said. And that's one of the things I'd like to share a bit as well. Let me just back up, Barb, briefly and speak about Broadreach. For those of you who are not familiar with the organization, Broadreach Group, it's headquartered in South Africa, so it's an African-based organization. It was founded 17 years ago by 2 Harvard Med School grads who had come to be good friends at med school, and then also had a common passion for making a difference on the African continent, and particularly looking at how to serve the most vulnerable and underserved of the population, getting access to good healthcare. Over the 17 years, we have become a PEPFAR implementer, implementing one of the largest PEPFAR programs on the African continent in South Africa, across 4 high prevalence districts in South Africa. And also along the way, about 4 or 5 years ago, in running those sorts of programs for PEPFAR, we began to build our own technology platform to run those programs. We actually formalized that technology called Vantage. Vantage is, you best think of it as an enterprise performance management system to run an entire health system, and provides information at the individual clinic level or individual facility manager, all the way up to a Department of Health executive. Vantage is built completely on the Microsoft stack, so it's actually an enterprise grade sort of industrial class technology, and we've seen that firsthand in COVID, which I'll mention in just a minute. But the important thing about Vantage that we saw was when we were trying to run our own programs, we had questions we needed answered. And from a fairly limited set of data, we needed to be able to answer key questions on how to optimize supply and demand. In particularly a scarce resource environment throughout South Africa and other African countries, optimizing your health resources is essential, with a particularly high demand around things like HIV. So we built artificial intelligence and machine learning into the technology itself, so that it actually, with the data, continues to learn and continues to be able to answer those questions better and better on where to go with certain facilities, how to optimize your resources, and how to actually make sure that the patient supply and the patient demand and supply is optimized. The other important note around that is, and this speaks to the private sector, Broadreach invested its own resources in building out that technology as a full up product on the Microsoft stack, so it's offered as a SaaS product. Let me speak briefly, Barb, to what we've done with respect to COVID. So running those major programs in South Africa, of course, we ran headlong into issues of COVID as soon as it hit. Pretty quickly, we saw an immediate need with working with our partners on the ground at the provincial departments of health, district departments of health. And so we built 7 targeted solutions. We would call it a pandemic management solution around our Vantage platform that we built up and scaled within 4 weeks and had rolled out in full production. On that technology, pretty quickly that we rolled out, we've now screened more than 2 million South Africans. We've run facility assessments on over 300 facilities, and trained over 10,000 health workers that are going door to door in trying to make sure that patients understand what their disease prevalence is, what their risks are, and getting them into facilities to be tested for COVID. And we've been able to link that technology up to the National Command Center for COVID for South Africa, so it's feeding data continuously up to the National Command Center. And again, the important thing about the theme I want to convey here is at scale, that we're ingesting over 300 screenings a minute. And you just have to be able to do this kind of stuff at scale when you're dealing with things like COVID. And I guess I would say that this is an example, besides the cool technology and all that, it's really an example of what committed people who have a common cause can do under a strike, the kinds of situation like COVID, the dynamics that brings in terms of bringing strife and stress to a situation, but people rise up and actually cause things to happen. And I guess, Barb, to your question, what does the opportunities of COVID yield for the ICT community and more broadly in health? I'd say a few things. It's forced us to innovate and to adopt whole new ways of working, actually, fueled by technology. Highlighted things like, as the minister said, connecting people and their work and changing the nature of work. It is in the process of democratizing information. This is sort of the holy grail, but we're seeing that firsthand with COVID. It has facilitated being nimble and agile, being able to adjust to things on the ground that you probably could have never even anticipated. And it is showing the power of artificial intelligence, that we can make decisions much more quickly when we have access to information that technology today can learn from to make us be able to make decisions much more quickly. And I would say the time for pilots is over. I've seen a plethora of pilots across the African continent of small ICT pilots that look cool on screen, that maybe look cool when you're doing it at one facility, but when you try to scale things up, they break pretty quickly. So I would say that COVID is being a forcing function for doing things at scale. And COVID has generated just an amount of new data. I think that will probably be research projects for years to come on how we responded to COVID, what we learned from COVID, and how we turn that learning into new knowledge to generate better health and economic outcomes on the continent. And then the other thing that I'm excited about once we are past this initial strife around COVID is what this can do for us on the African continent around ultimately achieving universal health coverage. These sorts of things that we're having to learn, doing things at scale, working at the facility level, but being able to manage groups of facilities across a large catchment. These are things that ultimately universal health care coverage, if we're going to achieve that by 2030, we have to actually adopt these sorts of methods and ultimately focus back on primary health care and non-communicable disease and the burden of disease that is going to be there long after we've got a vaccine and have rolled that out for COVID. And I guess I'd just say a couple of final thoughts more broadly on the African continent. As I look at the response, not only with Broadreach, but many other organizations, both private and public sector, have made in these last few months, there's tremendous technology expertise on the African continent. We should think of that as an export for the African countries, that we should look at how do we actually go about and export this capability. This brings economic growth to the African continent. Cross-nation sharing and learning. This will help African countries work better and more closely together. And I think ultimately will lessen the African continent's historic dependency on donor funding. And that creates long-term economic stability and growth. So that's just a few thoughts, Barb.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris. That was really insightful, and you packed a lot into a few minutes. So I really appreciate it. So you went from the technology point to how we can use the technology to better the communications between countries and with us, and to really make some large changes. So you're gonna have to apply that in America as well. So so we'll support you. So thank you so much, Chris. So let me now go on to Bodhi Abifarin, the Chief Operating Officer for Flutterwave. So if Chris, if you would just turn off your mic. There you go. Thank you. So Bodhi, I'd like you to share your thoughts on Flutterwave is a Nigerian fintech company, and it was founded for the purpose of providing an integrated payment solution for African enterprises and focuses on small and medium-sized businesses. Flutterwave is a member of CCA and whose CEO sits on CCA's board. Bodhi, if you would kindly discuss how COVID may have had an impact on Flutterwave's operations and what are the opportunities you see post-COVID? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Barbara. So Flutterwave is a payment infrastructure company. We help merchants, both enterprises and small businesses, pay and get paid. So like, you know, anything that happens to our merchants affects us. And you can imagine when COVID kicked in March, that's like the high point of our business, as you will imagine. People are going back to school, hotels, travels, education, everything was affected. So a couple of things that we did. Now, for a lot of our merchants, one of the things that we focus on is we usually have the customers at the center of everything that we do. So our accounts management team began to work very closely with our merchants to better understand their needs, because even for the merchants that were already selling online, receiving payments online, they were part of their businesses, that we also help them to begin to think about how do you digitize, you know, fully to ensure that you're able to reach your merchants. So we're able to do all of that for them. One critical area is the SMEs. You know, SMEs struggle a lot in terms of infrastructure across Africa. So what we did was we also implemented a very easy solution for SMEs that allows them to digitize their business in less than 5 minutes. So we created a product called the Flutterwave Store. It was a project that we called Keep the Lights On, because we wanted small businesses to continue to operate even when the lockdown was on. So you have mom and pop shops, you have small enterprises, you know, how do they get their businesses online? So the store is very easy to set up. It's equipped with inventory, logistics, and payments all in one. So what businesses have to do is to list their products on the Flutterwave account. Then they're able to generate a personal e-commerce URL that can be shared with their customers. And through this personalized e-commerce URL, the customers can place their orders, indicate their preferences for delivery, indicate pickup, complete payments, all from the comfort of their homes. So this was what we did, and we were able to roll this out across all our locations across Africa. Since we launched in April, we've had about 5,000 businesses sign up. So we have 5,000 businesses that will not have been able to showcase their goods to people. They've been able to do that since we launched this product. In addition to that, what we also did was we embarked on a lot of training. So over the past 4 months, every week, we have experts come to talk to the SMEs about, we had webinars where we talked about accounts management, customer service, how to advertise your goods, how to sell, so many different topics that we covered for the SMEs. And I think the amazing thing for us is if you see people that traditionally are used to going to their stores to sell, they're able to, you know, showcase the URL and reach thousands of customers that they couldn't even reach, you know, before the COVID. So as the minister said as well, you know, there's a lot of winners as well from the whole impact of COVID as well. So those are some of the things that we did during the COVID to survive.
Thank you, Bodhi. I have a question. Is your system available across Africa in all countries, or?
We're a global payments infrastructure company. So today we power the likes of Netflix. We power the likes of Microsoft. We're Uber's payments partner in Africa. Yeah, so it's available across. We have offices in Africa, so East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, South Africa, Nigeria. We have offices across all of these locations.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And so on the payment systems, what I'm very happy to see is that it's a payment system that's really focused on small and medium-sized businesses in Africa, which is the majority of the businesses and the majority of where people are operating, and so, or formerly the unbanked. So I think it's an excellent, excellent platform in order to push that forward. So it's combining these with traditional other banking solutions and the larger financial systems. So we wish you the best of luck, and you are, it's a very entrepreneurial what your company is doing. So we appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brad.
So now I would like, last but not least, is Charles Marito. And Charles is the Google Regional Director in Sub-Saharan African, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Government Affairs and Public Policy for Google. And so he has had a very broad experience in the multimedia world, including roles at MTV, Warner Brothers, and Turner Broadcasting. So from your perspective, what have you as Google done differently in Africa now that the world has stopped? And what do you see as the opportunities to support Africa's recovery? Charles?
Thank you so much, Barbara. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and sharing the floor with His Excellency, the Minister, as well as the other distinguished panelists. As Google, over the last couple of months, a lot of things have changed, and I won't focus more on the things that we've seen in terms of the uptake, because we've seen massive uptake of a lot of digital platforms over the last couple of months. But I'll also talk about some of the things that we've had to react and change the ways that we really have been working, partnering with governments as well as SMEs and other forms of constituencies that are our users and partners. So one of the key things when the COVID outbreak hit, we started doing a lot of outreach in order to engage with governments across the continent to see where they needed support, that they could leverage our tools. And then alongside that, focusing on best practices. How could we be able to leverage and drive the global scale that we have to be able to make sure that governments and other businesses on the continent can be able to understand what they can do? And I'll touch on a little bit about that. And then last but not least is availing the tools that we have to be able to enable a lot of utility across that. And the way I think about it is really focusing on three key buckets. On the first one is something that we know very well as Google, which is delivering quality information. And for that, we wanted to make sure that we structure this in a manner that enables different information to reach the most vulnerable or the needy when it comes to COVID. So we started localizing some of the things that we have, such as SOS alerts, pushing people. Governments wanted to deliver the message around staying at home or focusing on WHO, how to do the 5 in terms of making sure that you're staying clean, you're thinking about your health, etc. And so that's something that we did. Also around the quality information, we activated something that we call the Community Mobility Report, which I'm proud to say that all African countries are actually on this, and we're consistently looking how to deepen the information on that. And this became really useful, especially when lockdowns came into place, because what we needed, a lot of governments wanted to know, are the lockdowns working? Are people still moving from one way to another? And also, how can other organizations such as universities and other data collection services be able to distill that information to utilize it to help drive better public health services? So that's the way we looked at that. And we've been really grateful to work with different ministries, including Minister Moshero's department, to help drive some of these initiatives. On the second piece, and we spoke about this through the minister, is around education. We've seen a massive divide between those who have and those who don't, especially around education. So what we did is avail some of our products, such as EDU, Google for Education, as well as YouTube and live streaming classes and uploading courses to be able to deliver this information to those students who actually need it across, as long as they have that connectivity. And then last but not least, which I want to delve a little bit, and I think it's the second part of your question, is around the economic impact. And this has been something that we really care about. As you know, across Africa, SMBs are truly the lifeblood of economies. In Nigeria and Kenya alone, over 84% of jobs are actually powered by SMBs. And so this is something that we really wanted to make sure that we think about how can we be able to impact the society and the countries, and in particular the SMB sector, to be able to help continue keeping the lights on, as Bodhi mentioned, for a lot of these businesses. So the first thing we wanted to do was to understand what is important to them. How can we be able to enable them to work and keep their lights on? So we actually ran some research, and we found out that a lot of SMBs needed three things. The first one is money. So they needed to be able to access money, especially at this particular time when businesses were shut down, customers are not coming in, and we're able to get that information to them. The second piece is around services that would help them, support them to get online, to sell their goods online. So I actually want to follow up with Bodhi on that, because that's fantastic work. And then last but not least is around customers. So I just want to delve into a little bit on each one of those three things. Around the funds, what we've actually done is partnered with a couple of payments companies to look at how we can be able to give SMBs access to cash and cash advances. Also, we're working closely with certain banks to be able to enable that, because it's something that's really critical. And at this particular point, technology becomes a critical piece of that, so that they can be able to access the funds in a way that they couldn't have been able to do previously. And at a later point in the year, we'll be working on a couple of more partnerships that we will be able to announce at that particular point. The second piece, as I mentioned, is around how do I get services, how do I get education, and how do I get my services online and my goods online. And we've done a couple of things on that front. The first one is something that we had started in 2017 when Sundar Pichai, our CEO, came to Africa. We actually made a commitment to train 10 million Africans on digital skills. What we've done is actually amplified that and also pivoted. Instead of face-to-face trainings, we've actually moved that online. And we've seen a massive uptick literally over the last couple of months, whereby we've seen 2 to 3x the number of people who have been training online and taking those courses online than it was previously done before. So we're looking to ensure that we continue building on that. The second step is making sure that when people understand the opportunity that's online, that they can be able to actually get those businesses online. And this is where I'll definitely follow up with Bodhi. On this, we've been really amplifying the work we do on Google My Business. This is not a new product, but we've just really doubled down on this. And to ensure that not only are we educating businesses, but we're also enabling the verification process and making that a lot easier when it comes to getting those businesses online. And then last but not least is really helping those businesses understand the power of e-commerce and really enabling them to look at how can they be able to reach more customers online. And what we've done is delivered free e-commerce training classes, but also partnered with organizations such as Yoko and MasterCard, and delivering partnerships also with organizations like Orderin, so that those businesses, those SMBs can be able to put their businesses online and be able to get those customers across the board. And then last but not least, building on that piece is making sure that we're launching some free marketing online toolkits. We've done some SMB ad grants that we've given out to certain SMBs, and then also really looking at ways of promoting certain businesses on maps and highlighting those businesses on Google search as well. So those are the few things that we currently have done so far. But as we look forward to the next couple of months, we're looking at other various ways that we can continue partnering with governments as well as other private sectors to ensure that we can get more businesses working across the rest of the year, especially now that we see that the COVID numbers are continuing to rise. So the peak in most of our countries is actually not behind us and is still ahead. Thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you, Charles. The only thing I ask is you reduce the size of your title. that would help me a lot. There's just too much to say about you, so we need to get a shorter title. You know, the shorter title is better. But that being said, Google has been transformative in many, many areas, in commerce and infrastructure and education, and you have an amazing platform. And I have even seen advertisements in the US for small businesses on how to get online. So I'm sure you're using similar things. There is some pieces that we do need to talk about, and I'm going to start to go into round 2 of the questions and ask about policy. And so one of the issues that we see all over is the whole of when you're talking about quality of information, what does that mean? And oftentimes I'm seeing a lot of scam information that's starting to come across of what you can take to prevent COVID and these kinds of things. And that's not a Google problem per se, but it's that these are things that we all have to work together in the community to resolve, and so that what is, you know, quality information. So with that, I would like to go on and go back to His Honorable here and start round 2, which is, what types of changes to the policy environment, if any, do we need going forward to strengthen the ICT sector on the continent and to drive this economic recovery? How might these be implemented? And so, Your Honorable, I hand it over to you.
Thank you very much again, Barbara, and this is a great conversation and I'm enjoying. So thanks also really to CCA for making this possible. Let me say, in terms of policy, there are many new things that have come up. So first, when we look at government, we have many structures and many systems that we put in place and laws. For instance, electronic signatures is one. We have how documents are supposed to be transferred. I would say when I came from Google, I never imagined one day in my life we would print an email so that I can write on it and for someone in the government to act on it. So some of the good policy changes we're making is, for instance, some of our institutions have said, don't send us any physical documents. We will receive the documents, you scan them, sign them, we will receive them, we'll print if necessary, or we'll archive them if required. Some of these have required that we change the law and really the policy on how we operate, and that's been critical. It's been critical on how even the legislature meets. We had some of our members of parliament have the disease, COVID, and therefore do laws stop being made because some people have and they can no longer meet in parliament. So policies are being changed to allow for members to even join these meetings and discussions virtually. When we are summoned now, whether it is to Parliament, Senate, or the National Assembly, we can now do that online, and it will be admissible even in court, changing laws even as far as the judiciary is concerned. There are certain ways we've been working where, this is how you hire people, you must meet them, this is how they are trained, this is what public participation is. Many of those have now to change. We are trying to do everything to ensure there's as little public participation in terms of physical participation, but we want more participation. And interestingly enough, using technology, you can be able to ensure you have a much wider reach. Everybody has a voice because they can be able to put in their comments and feedback. I mean, we're meeting, this call has, a global audience, over 243 of us. That's a huge number of people from everywhere. The connectivity is working. If we needed to have a conference before, it meant we all had to find ways of flying and meeting there. That is unnecessary. Now we can meet. A lot of savings. So there are very many policies that now will actually be changed. In the past, for us, sometimes as civil servants, it's always better to fly and go see something. Now we can actually meet and save the taxpayer a lot of money. So Before, it was difficult to change such policies. Now COVID-19 is making it easier to, to actually change the policies and be able to move forward. I would say the only other area that we need to strengthen in a big way is that of cybersecurity, espionage, people pretending to be others, even on the digital money, people being scammed and phishing, all these things that are going on. So to ensure that we have the right punishments in place, data protection. We've seen also, children now that they're at home and they're also gaining access to technology. Then this technology is being misused in terms of how to deal with the children. Increased use of, the systems even on pornography and other things that we as a country don't support. It's illegal. So ensuring that we are accelerating the policies, the rules, and even the laws that ensure if people are caught in any of these vices, that they're dealt with very quickly and efficiently. So there's all that that is required. And I hope I've covered most of the areas, but I would say really at the moment, technology is at the heart of almost everything that is being done. We have to ensure, in the hospitals, how, data is being managed, the privacy and confidentiality of individuals. There are those who are happy to come out and say, they are positive. There are those that don't want, and they, their privacy must be protected. In many cases where we had manual system, we have to now convert them to digital systems and ensure that, the policies are heavily used. So by and large, I think that's what we are working on. We've seen even how we manage and work with the media. There's been a lot of fake news, a lot of misinformation, as you've mentioned, even from some of the leaders. How do we deal with that from a policy and political point of view? And so all those are currently in process, and many of my people are actually on this call, the policymakers. They want to really understand what are the things that we can do to ensure that we have a better environment as we continue. Thank you again, Barbara.
Okay, thank you. That was excellent. The only piece that I would like you to also comment on is infrastructure. So now we're moving to a 5G world. Do you have comments on that from the government of Kenya?
Yes, infrastructure is key, and I think it's been probably one of our biggest challenges. We, as I've said, have already taken advantage of the Google loan. I happen to have been at Google, so this is something that we've tried to push even with Charles for a long time, and finally our security services have accepted. But there is the push and pull on 5G from, I think it's become more political than technical. I think we've seen people saying that 5G is the one bringing COVID, but in countries like Kenya where we haven't yet deployed 5G and we still do have COVID cases, then that's evidence enough that the two are not related. We will not slow down on technology as Kenya. We will continue to ensure that we give our citizens the best that they can get. We want to ensure as a government we're providing all the key services that need to be provided. We will be trying the trials for 5G quite soon, so we'll open up, and we hope many of the vendors will be able to come and compete, so that we as a country also are able to compete and join the rest of the world that is already on 5G. We are also working hard to see with the partnerships with the various companies, can we start local manufacturing, local assembly of devices? Because part of the digital divide is that even though you have great connectivity, people don't have the right devices to be able to access services. But this can also be manufactured or assembled locally. We found that during this COVID period, countries also started closing their borders. You want to import ventilators, they say no. You want to import medicines, they say no. So the infrastructure we're talking about is not even just technology infrastructure. We want to have capability of producing our own pharmaceutical products, capabilities of ensuring that we are in a sense self-sufficient. As much as we're global, we found that the pandemic has shown that if you're not careful, you can be locked out of very key essential medicines, essential equipment and infrastructure. So those are some of the policies that we're looking at. So it's no longer just about the cheapest, most efficient. I think it's also about national security that we have to look at. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. That was excellent remarks. Thank you. I appreciate that. Chris, can you respond now?
Sure. So I guess from our perspective, I'd probably point out three things from a policy perspective, and these predate COVID, but COVID really has accentuated these challenges that we've seen. One is data sharing policies across countries. Disease, it's obvious disease knows no borders, and this predates COVID. I mean, these are other diseases across the African continent. We actually continue to run a program that's based out of Kenya, but is a regional program across both East and West Africa. And we thought that we would be able to help harness data from across multiple countries to be able to provide good disease surveillance information back to key decision makers. But we ran headlong into challenges at the national level in protecting their own data. And while obviously nations need to protect their data assets, there are ways that we think from a policy perspective, these barriers need to be broken down to help all countries be able to succeed, particularly in something like disease management, disease surveillance and pandemic management. A second key area is sort of related to that, and that's evolving our thinking at a country level on where data physically resides. There are some legacy requirements that many countries hold on to, that their data must physically reside in that country. I think that's sort of antiquated thinking. Today in the cloud environment, data can actually reside anywhere, and in fact is probably more safe if it's residing in the cloud and protected by robust cloud-based services, whether it's Google or Microsoft or Amazon or whatever, and more reliable and better uptime. So that's a key issue that I think governments have to get beyond and actually be able to understand that it's actually a better thing if their data is not physically sitting on a server in an ICT minister's office somewhere. Not that would be in your office, minister, but and then the third area is legal frameworks around IP and ensuring that we foster the ICT industries that are tremendous already in places like Kenya and Nigeria and others, but really making sure that the laws and the policies support that IP development and foster entrepreneurship. There's so many amazing entrepreneurs in places like Nairobi and Lagos and others, but being able to foster that entrepreneurship and actually give them access to good IP protection so that they have an economic incentive to invest their own resources or the resources of their investors. And I would just say environmentally, the enabling environment that these things, that would help these things, back to my comment about talent, these sorts of things to hold on to ICT talent and nurture that ICT talent that already exists on the continent, and then looking outward to colleagues, whether it's in Silicon Valley or elsewhere, to be able to create knowledge hubs that would share best practice and new ideas. You've seen Silicon Valley actually has lots of competitors to each other, but they also share information. They share the latest ideas and the latest thinking on technology. I'd like to see more of that happening on the African continent. Building long-term entrepreneurship and the leadership that's required around entrepreneurship to bridge this divide across entrepreneurs and also between entrepreneurs and the public sector. I was so excited to see the minister actually spent time in the private sector. So you understand what the dynamics are, what the pressures are on the private sector, but also now how to overlay the things that only government can do to make sure that those two pieces work in partnership. And finding like-minded governments and like-minded associations, whether it's within a particular country or a region or across the world, to share best practice and be able to promulgate ICT capabilities across the region writ large across Africa. That's just some thoughts, Barbara.
Thanks, Chris. That's excellent. And you've touched on a lot of key issues that we could have entire conversations about. And some of the health data issues, and there were issues even here in the US in sharing data. And so getting the personally identified information portion stripped off so that it was then available for researchers took a long time in the US. And I think it's something that we actually need to do in Africa as well. And I think that's very important for the specifics of the health data and
Yeah,
where the data resides.
we're not necessarily a good example of what should be done in COVID times.
Right.
The
But,
United States has failed pretty miserably, I'd say.
yeah. So anyway, so don't follow us, at least right now. We're working on it. But anyway, so those are the 3 hot topics that, in all honesty, have been around for almost 20 years in terms of data and where it's located and the intellectual property. And when there's not clear intellectual property rights, and you get entrepreneurs coming up and then quitting because, you know, they don't get any value from their investment in it. And so those are key issues that you brought up that could be talked about endlessly on the continent as well as globally. So we have similar issues. So thank you, Chris. That was very, very good. Okay, I'd like to turn it over to you, Bode, to also make a comment. Oops, are you hearing me?
Yes,
Bode?
I can. Yes, I can. Thank you. All right. So from our own end, in terms of payments, I think what we saw with a lot of the central banks, the regulators in each of these countries, they rolled out a number of things to make it easier for SMEs during this time. So things around loan restructuring, things around helping to waive things, if a customer wants to do balance inquiry, waiving of fees, increasing transaction limits. So there were a lot of things around that, but the question is, were the banks actually implementing a lot of these things? If you look at the small and medium businesses,
where they present different
especially the micro businesses or that maybe borrowed money to start off their businesses, there wasn't really enforcement from the central banks. Gave the go ahead that restructure the loans, but who is enforcing and ensuring that they're enforcing all of these things, because it's very critical for their growth as well. I think the other thing is, as we begin to help the businesses digitize, so things around onboarding, because it's end-to-end digital. So some of the things that we require from a compliance perspective, ensuring that we have databases that we can rely on across as well, ID recognition, a lot of the things that makes it easier. When I talked about the store, I said, you know, you can get online in 5 minutes, but you also have to ensure that, you know, they pass the compliance. So do we have all of these things that will also aid and enable these people to be able to get online quickly, and for us to be able to verify the people coming on the platform as well. So those are some of the things that from a risk and compliance perspective will also continue to help, because this is the new norm. This is what is going to continue to happen. Imagine within a period of 4 months, having 5,000 businesses being able to transact who haven't been able to do anything. And there's still so many more that continue to go online day after day, week after week that we see. I think the other thing will now be access, because internet access continues to be a big problem. A lot of the mom and pop stores that we saw sign up, they were doing that for the first time. So airtime, data prices, all of those things also come into play as you begin to look at all of those. I think if those are the areas I believe will help this, because this has come to stay, and we have to help these businesses continue to grow.
Thank you, Bodhi. That was excellent. And you are right. So we're moving in a whole new direction in terms of banking. And so
Yes.
These transactions and the laws have not actually caught up in all parts of Africa. So it is significant to be able to make these new transactions, and it's much better for the companies themselves. So you're hitting on all points. So hopefully we can move that forward. And so before I start with you, Charles, to respond as well, I just want to note to folks that this will be the last of the main questions. My final question was really about how to encourage entrepreneurs in Africa. And I think the panelists have touched on that. They can also touch on that in some of the questions I think that are coming up. But Charles, I'll let you now respond to the policy question and what you see is needed, or what are some good policies you want to see. So thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Before I touch on the policy piece, I would love to talk about the rights and quality information piece and give a little bit more color on that, because you're absolutely right. At this particular time, it's absolutely critical that we are able to deliver or people are able to access qualitative and authoritative information that they can rely on. And so as Google, what we've done is on the different platforms that we have, we are giving preference and really making sure that authoritative partners' information is what's being surfaced, whether it's on search, etc. And on that, for instance, when it comes to health, we already had partnered with Mayo Clinic to do one boxes across many parts of the world. In Nigeria, on a local level, we've actually partnered with the University of Ibadan Teaching Hospital to be able to surface that authoritative information. And we're continuing to do that because we believe that that is a really critical piece in terms of fighting misinformation. Also, we've also partnered with governments to provide ad grants so that they can be able to deliver the information and PSAs that they want to do at this particular point. And so we've done that with a couple of countries across the continent, including South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, and Ghana, as well as Ethiopia. And the reason for that is so that governments and ministries of health can be able to disseminate that information online to people who are seeking that information. And so that's something that's really important. And then on the health side, we've also delivered some community grants to various organizations who are working deeply on at this particular point during COVID, so that we can be able to deliver and have the right information that can also be able to surface. So I wanted to just touch on that piece because as you were closing, you highlighted that something that's quite important at this particular point.
It is.
Now,
it's very key, and I didn't want to have it avoided. Go ahead, sorry.
No, absolutely. And thanks for asking or mentioning that. On the policy side, the way I think about it is that we are at a pivotal point when it comes to development and the internet, the transition to tech and internet and e-commerce, that as governments, we need to really think about how we can be able to accelerate innovation and accelerate the uptake of digital as we continue to go. And there are a couple of things which are really exciting for me that are happening right now across the continent. The first one is right here at home, and His Excellency Joe Moshero knows about this, is the US-Kenya Free Trade Agreement that's currently in negotiations. And this is a great piece of legislation or trade agreements that's happening, which we have the opportunity to really set the right cross-border agreements when it comes to trade, and going forward, what kinds of policies we're going to have going forward for many years to come. And having a really strong digital protocol in that is going to be key. And then the second one is the AU, African Continental Free Trade Agreement, that's also started late last year. And unfortunately, the implementation has been delayed into January 2021. But the good thing about what's happening is that now there's going to be a digital protocol that's going to be specific, that's going to happen on AFICTA. On that, I think as private sector, as tech companies and other organizations, we need to take a leading role to really be engaged on this and make sure that our thoughts and our views are part of that, so that we are part of encouraging the acceleration of technology and e-commerce going forward. And more specifically around policies, Chris really touched on a lot of the policies, whether it's the cross-border data flows, data localization, etc. And Bodhi also mentioned a few of those, but I wanted to touch on a couple which one touched. And for me, the first one is really around content regulation. And that comes across many various ways, making sure that we can have the right level of regulation around content, because if I am a small content producer that is creating a YouTube channel and I want to make a living, for instance, there's someone here in Kenya, a comedian who's called Desagu. If Desagu has to continuously get every piece of video approved and classified before he uploads it, it's going to be insane, right? So we know that we currently have hundreds of millions of hours, millions of hours of content being uploaded every single minute on YouTube. So it is absolutely impossible to actually get that classification as you would at a broadcast channel perspective. So I think content regulation, we need to put the right legislation around that so that we can encourage more content creators, the youth to be able to earn a living, creating interesting content and not hamper that type of innovation. The second piece that I would love to talk on is around the e-commerce and the laws around e-commerce. And that comes in various forms. Some of that is around taxation. So we need to have the right forms of taxes that can be implemented so that people can be encouraged and we don't hamper the innovation of those businesses. So for instance, who should pay taxes? Is it the person who's selling an actual product? Or is the tax supposed to be paid by a platform, right? So those are conversations that we need to have discussions with treasuries across Africa. And hopefully, as we're looking at AFICTA and some of the other trade agreements, we can have those meaningful conversations around that. Another one is, for instance, what happened in Nigeria in terms of the hail riding services, etc. So really having legislation that enables this innovation is what we need to do. And for me personally, I'm excited about partnering with more governments across the continent because the one thing that I have seen is the willingness to accelerate economic growth and economic recovery, especially post-COVID. So I think that there will be a lot of interaction and engagement across, and so that we can have the right levels of policies implemented over the next couple of months and into the next year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. And again, you touched on so many issues, which was excellent. And any one of them can be a full-on session, and just the taxation, the quality of information, how we deal with that. But the important thing is that we're starting to address it from the private sector, the public sector, and the civil society sectors. And all of these are needed at the table to get to the right place for what we're doing and what we're doing going forward. And I would agree with you, and I think His Honorable would agree with me as well. From the start of the internet, we didn't know what it was going to be. We had some ideas, and the ideas around taxation and the rest of it, you know, even for the US had started to come up later. And we need to address those pieces and to see without crushing the new form of trade and education and all the rest of it. So those are key pieces, and thank you so much. That was very well spoken, so thank you. So now I would like to go to some of the questions that have been asked from the audience. Joe, did you want to make a comment?
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment because, you know, I went fast, and policy is usually government. And so I really wanted to make sure some of the questions Chris has raised, even Body and Charles, I can just address very briefly.
Go ahead.
One of our biggest challenges we've had in the country and continues to be is registration of our individuals, digital ID. We call it Huduma number. This is something we're trying to expand across the whole continent. Our president launched the digital economy blueprint for Africa within the Smart Africa umbrella. That's over 600 million. And now, as Charles has mentioned, we now have the Continental Free Trade Area that brings the whole of Africa. So as a continent, as governments, we're working hard to try and make sure we have a single ID database that can actually be shared across all the different markets so that it is easy. I think for Body, that would really help in ensuring, first of all, you can identify people, you can create the trust that is there so that when when somebody takes a loan or someone is transacting, you can actually know who that is. And for governments, because of security, because of anti-money laundering, all the way to terrorism, we have that information. We have in the past faced a lot of resistance in trying to implement this kind of systems, primarily because they create a lot more transparency and openness, and those that have been operating in the dark alleys of technology fear. I think COVID is helping us open that even more. And really what we have seen, especially now with the Continental Free Trade Area, countries are willing. First, we've been sharing data on security and terrorism. We want to be able to share that now as far as financial transactions are concerned and identities of people are concerned. Chris, you'll be happy to know that as a country, we have been using the cloud, international cloud, not just Kenya. So I don't have servers in my office somewhere, holding all the government data. That is available. And we continue. I think during our elections, we have Kenyans in the diaspora who have to vote, who have to participate. So their data is held in other parts of the world, and therefore we must allow for that to happen. We have seen that the central banks have been a bit more careful in how this data is stored and who is storing this data. But that is in terms of policy as a country, our new policies in place, we actually have this openness. And what we're trying to do, especially within the digital economy blueprint for Africa, is ensure we have one single digital market. During our time at Google, I would say one of the biggest challenges that I faced is that because Africa is so fragmented, it was very hard to just go and talk about Africa. In fact, at some point we're saying Africa doesn't exist. It's just individual countries, because you may talk about all the numbers, but because of that fragmentation, it doesn't always work. So I would say there's a lot that we're doing from a policy point of view, and our president is championing with other presidents to just ensure we actually just have a single digital market. And if that comes into play, and especially during this COVID time, I think we will see a very different Africa come out of these challenges. Thank you, Barbara.
No, thank you so much. That was excellent, excellent contribution. So I do want to get to two questions from the audience, and then we're going to have to close out. We are coming up to our time. So the first question is, what do the panelists see as the top 3 barriers to digital entrepreneurship and the development of digital skills beyond infrastructure? So would you like to take that first, Honorable?
Yes, that I can take. I think the first thing in terms of challenges is intellectual property. And I believe this is something that's been mentioned by Chris, and being able to protect that property that people have developed, the innovation results in, if it is protected, then you'll be able to get more capital for that innovation. Unfortunately, what's happened in our area, we have many small startups, and people come and buy not just the innovation, they buy even the entrepreneur, the business, they buy everything, and therefore there is no value. And since we're starting from a very low base in terms of capital, many of our young people are ready to sell versus grow something so that it is larger. And so we are looking at ways of being able to solve that, and I won't go into all the details, but definitely we've identified that as one of the key challenges. Another is the ability for the entrepreneurs to understand scale. So there's training and experience that has actually been a challenge. And because of training and experience, most investors, including banks, don't just invest in an idea, they invest in people. They want to see that you've had the experience, you've been able to grow a business, to scale a business, and make it work across borders. That is not always available, and that creates some of the challenges. And really, I would say the last one is some of the legal processes. I think everybody using either the legal process and ways of the financial process of valuing the business. There's some challenges in how do you value an idea. There's challenges again in who started it and who owns it. And really, as a government, we're looking at how to really provide that transparency and openness so that people are able to then move to the next phase. Provide the seed capital that is needed in partnership with the private sector. There are certain things we're trying to do with Google that will help us with our youth enterprise development fund that we'd be able to at least get this sector moving. But mentorship, good examples of businesses are also areas that we need to see happening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. Does anybody else want to respond from the panel? Chris?
Just a brief comment on that. I think you were spot on,
And then Charles,
about that. You know, what I've seen is there's a gap in access to capital. There have been over the years lots of accelerator funds and small sort of startup funds that have been partly donor funded, particularly in some of the hubs like Nairobi and Lagos. And then there's the traditional banking financing, and then there's a big gap in the middle, and that's really the long-term venture plays that people that seems to me to be still missing. And part of that is I think that we have to have a longer-term view on the African continent. We have to look at the long view, the long arc of time, and not presume that this is going to be a 3-year payback or a 5-year payback. And that incidentally is part of the problem with these donor funds. They tend to be these sort of short-term programs. We really need to take that longer view and find the ways to fund that missing piece, and also help banks and traditional lending institutions understand where to sort of pick up that financing, so that, because these businesses are going to take a while, it's not going to be a 3-year runway. That even in IT, it may take 5 to 10 years. So I think that that's a huge missing piece in my mind, and really considering the longer, really looking at the long view.
Okay, thanks so much, Chris. I think Charles, you wanted to jump in here.
Yes, from our end, a couple of things that we've seen that have been challenging is also talent, the ability to actually have the talent that can help drive those businesses, whether it's the tech talent or the traditional talent. That's something that's important. Logistics has also been a challenge in terms of actually being able to deliver goods from one point to another. And so that's something that I know that many governments are working on, but still there's definitely a sort of a bottleneck around that. And then last but not least is access to markets, the ability to scale and get into markets whereby historically a product cannot be able to get into. That has been something that has been very challenging for a lot of entrepreneurs that we've engaged with across the continent, especially when you look at our Launchpad program, which we've now graduated over 60 startups over the last 3 years. That has always been one of those big challenges that we've seen, that the access to markets has been something that they require. So we hope that we can continue collaborating both with governments and public sector to be able to deliver that to a lot of the entrepreneurs across the continent.
Okay, thanks very much, Charles. I am just going to have one more question because we're really running out of time. There are some excellent questions, and I really hate to do this. But one of the questions is about the African Union, but from John Berg to all the panelists. Are there unexploited opportunities for the AU to play a more productive role in supporting the efforts described here today? Would anyone like to take that on? And be as brief as possible.
Be very brief, but I'll say one of the great questions I've seen also is from my former chairman and boss, Eric Schmidt, on the call. So I'll just call him out. It's exciting to see him at least listening to what we're doing. The African Union really has evolved and has grown, and really, I would say even the Economic Commission for Africa, which is part of the African Union, if you look at many of the groups that have been set up, they're taking full advantage of technology. One, to create a single digital market. We need to have that market. Two, to have even our own ability to have funding, come from our own resources. We have so much resource in terms of talent, in terms of innovations, in terms of even mineral resources, if you talk of other physical things. And we can be able to do all that. So I would say first, our presidents have now really taken on to technology. President Museveni the other day was really talking about the value of the of the megabit and the terabit. You know, he's even gone into the technical descriptions of how important it is to have connectivity. I think they, as presidents, and especially with our President Kenyatta, they are really driving the technology discussion. And that is why, as ministers, we feel very proud and very free to be able to deploy the technologies and to be able to evolve as is required. So I think all is going well. I hope I was brief enough.
Perfect. Would one other panelist like to respond? And then we're going to have to close out. We're actually over time.
I'm happy to go because as Google, and also I know a lot of my other colleagues in the tech industry are really engaged around AFICTA, and we really believe that this is going to be a transformational agreement that's going to be able to open up a lot of borders, solve for a lot of the challenges that we're discussing in terms of the policy issues, and the ability to harmonize a lot of these policies is really going to enable us to be a more united Africa when instead of that fragmentation that we've had across many years, the ability to be able to launch a business and scale across either 54 countries or 48 sub-Saharan countries, that now creates the scale that's really going to make a lot of investors and a lot of other customers in terms of people who want to deliver businesses, good services and goods across the board at scale to really sit up and take notice. So for me, AFICTA is one of those legislations that I'm really excited to see implemented. And the thoughtfulness of all the different protocols from IP to trade to digital and beyond really excites me that they have been able to think about this in a really thoughtful way that once implemented and ratified, we can see a lot of acceleration of growth and business and truly capture that youth dividend that we've been talking about for so many years that Africa bears. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Charles. That was excellent. I am going to have to close out this session. You were an excellent panel and just so well versed in all the topics. And there's just, I know that each of you are cutting yourselves off. There's so much we could go into on so many of them. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate the audience tuning in. And I know that there are many other smaller topics we might take on in a panel such as this. We kind of started a little broadly, but I'm going to turn it over to Flory to give you closing remarks. Flory.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Barbara, and thanks to Tom Hardy and our 4 excellent panelists for today's really incredible and wide-ranging discussion. Thank you to the audience for being so engaging with your questions. I'm Flory Lazier, President and CEO of the Corporate Council on Africa, and I hope you found the discussion as interesting and thought-provoking as I did. Today's webinar inspired us to think in new ways about the crucial role the ICT sector is already playing in Africa's development, from education and health sectors to commerce, finance, and so much more. It also opened our eyes to the key role this sector plays during COVID-19 and how it must be adaptable and how it can help us reimagine Africa's future post-COVID. Out of the devastation of this pandemic can also come opportunity and hope. And the ICT sector is helping build resilience and continuing to really revolutionize the way we live our lives. Sometimes I resist this revolution, but it's indeed here to stay. So much of it isn't, as you all know, happening automatically. As we've discussed today, governments need to continue to help create the right policy and regulatory environment in consultation and partnership with the private sector, including on issues like cybersecurity, which was mentioned, as well as skills development that was touched on. And the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AFCFTA, will play an increasingly important role in shaping cross-boundary ICT policies, something Minister Musheru highlighted, and Charles mentioned just now in terms of market access and a more united Africa. These need to have business input and be business friendly to really spur the investment and innovation Africa needs, and the type of capital that Chris mentioned has to be generated in this sector. International partners, including, of course, USTDA, are already engaged in this sector, but there is a need for more support, including through public-private partnerships. And at the end of the day, the private sector will drive digital innovation. So I hope this webinar has helped highlight the enormous ICT business opportunities in Africa. CCA will continue to engage and support in this exciting and critical sector. And on behalf of CCA, thanks again to our panelists, to our moderator, and to all of the audience for your participation. Stay safe and have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much.